I'll bring the meeting back into to order. So after discussing with the chair, reviewing some of the standing orders, and also reviewing some precedent, I am going to recognize Mr. Perkins' motion as a privilege motion. Now, first, the first step is that you're flagging and I'll come to you in just 1 second, Mr. Erickson-Smith. Why don't you hear what I have to say, and then we can have, I'm sure, points of order discussions about it. So, well, possibly. I lost, and so I'm going to uphold that your belief that you believe your privileges have been infringed upon, which then triggers your motion. So I will turn to you, Mr. Perkins, to now speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I move this, for all of those who are watching, part of this process of being accountable to Parliament is for witnesses to actually answer the questions that we pose. And I'll go through a series of some of the questions that were asked that I'm aware of, and I'm sure others may add a little more to it, that were very simple questions put to the former Liberal minister, but he refused to answer them and basically kept repeating the lines in his opening statement, the same line over and over again, as if he were some sort of automatron or something. So I started by asking him if he had called and spoken with Annette Verschuren twice. Very simple question. He refused to answer that. He talked about the appointments process. And I said, well, Mrs. Sharon testified before committee that you had called twice. Is she right or you? And he talked about the appointments process. I then, after obviously some frustration and interruptions, went on to another area. I asked him, did he appoint Andre Lise-Matteau in 2016? And he went on about the appointments process and wouldn't say yes or no on somebody. He's on the record as a GIC appointment of appointing. Not he is on the record, it's public record. Then I pointed out the fact that while she was on the board under his watch, that $114 million went to her companies. Was he aware of that? And he talked about the good work of SDTC, didn't talk about whether he's knowledgeable. I said, your assistant deputy minister was in those meetings, Mr. Noseworthy. You must have been informed about that. And he basically said it's a fair and open process. I then went on to ask him about the $750 million that he gave. I should say that before I asked that, I asked in the 25 times that current Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault was lobbying in the year before he was elected, while he was a nominated candidate, that he was lobbying his office on the public record, the lobbyist registry, for Cycle Capital, for money, for Cycle Capital Fund number 4, whether or not he remembered those meetings. And he basically talked about the open appointments process, and he can't be remembered, shouldn't have to remember everything in his life. And then I said, okay, so those meetings were about, as in the registry, meeting with you, of getting money from EDC, and EDC gave $145 million. Do you remember that? And he talked about the activities of SDTC, not about that process to get money. Then I asked about the fact that after all of this corruption that was going on within the fund, his appointment of a conflicted chair, his appointment of board members that were conflicted, like Andre Lise-Matteau, the fact that he had officials in the meeting, every single meeting, where 82% of the time they were voting themselves taxpayer money, why he would take and give $750 million and get cabinet approval to give $750 million more only a month before he left the job to go work at CIBC. $750 million more taxpayer money for this fund when there were clearly management issues. And he again talked about the appointments process. Now, that's just my questions. There were some excellent questions from MP Cooper around the 5 appointments that he made, and whether or not he recalled any of them and whether any of them were conflicted. And he talked about the PCO appointments process. I'm sure some of my colleagues will come up with some other lists, but the member from the bloc brought forward a new revelation that Amber Bettal, the VP at SDTC, for his time there, she worked there for 5 years, and when he was at CIBC, he left, joined CIBC, and guess what? Guess who gets up and starts working at CIBC in the investment banking area where I believe he was, and it is the same person who was working at SDTC. He claims to know nobody and nothing that went on. So time after time after time, when we asked about individual appointments, when we asked about money, when we asked about the reporting of his assistant deputy minister to him, when we asked about whether or not he did a basic thing like a phone call to a prospective chair of the fund, he didn't say, "I don't remember." In most cases, he repeated his opening statement line of an open process and that people applied. He totally ignored every single question that opposition parties asked. Unfortunately, we don't know if he ignored questions of the government members because government members didn't ask any. So that's why we have a breach of privilege. There has to be an attempt by the witness to actually answer the question, not repeat a line that's been written for him and ignore the question totally in order to facilitate the further cover-up of these documents and the refusal of the government to turn over the documents to the House. They're clearly hiding things. They're clearly hiding more corruption. And this Liberal minister and the current Liberal minister, but this one started the process, and the current minister who's been asleep at the switch for 40 months and didn't do anything till it was made public in the media, and still hasn't done anything really because it's still SDTC. It's just got 3 bureaucrats running it now as opposed to Liberal board members. So he didn't answer any questions. He is obstructing the work of this committee in our study of the corruption into SDTC, and we need to send a report to the Speaker for the House to deal with this breach of our privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I have a long list. Mr. Erskine-Smith, you have the floor next.
Yeah. Before I get to any kind of response, because at the end of the day, Mr. Baines said a couple of times, "I don't recall" an answer, and Mr. Perkins just glided by that as if that's not a sufficient answer when it was 8 years ago. And of course, it is an answer. Whether he might not like it, but it's an answer. So, like, we don't have to be children about it. That's an obvious answer. The second part of this, though, is Chair, you yourself said he may well come back. So this is premature and then some. But I would love to hear you, Mr. Chair, said based on precedent. So what's the precedent? Walk us through. When you've got a witness who isn't even done their testimony yet, there's a privilege motion. I would love to hear from the clerk, and I would love to hear from you. Walk me through why you ruled that this is an acceptable privilege motion. What's the precedent? Because this is a terrible precedent to set.
Well, Mr. Erskine-Smith, at this point, I'm not part of the debate, so...
No. But what's the precedent? You said there's precedent, so what's the precedent?
Well, most recently, in January, there was a ruling that involved Mr. Fursk in his unwillingness to answer questions. That's all I'm going to say because I'm not part of the debate.
Yeah, can I just raise a point of order?
That's the precedent that you're pointing to, Chair? That's the precedent?
Can I just raise a point of order?
That is a laughable joke. That's an absolute joke.
Durant, you have the floor. Sorry, Mr. Durant, you have a point of order.
Yeah, just again.
Sorry, I do too.
Well, just one, Mr. Durant, just one second. If you have a point of order, you need to say point of order, because otherwise I assume you're looking to speak to the motion. So I didn't. Sorry. So Mr. Durant first, and I'll recognize you, Mr. Genuis.
As well as I appreciate, 2, 4, 6 members of Conservative Party on the other side. I do appreciate that, but there has to be some form of decorum, and I believe if you look at the book, I still don't know whether or not Mr. Genius was actually subbed in, and I will refer you to Bosque and Gagnon, Chapter 20, When members serve on subcommittees or as substitutes for regular members, they enjoy all the rights of regular members. They are counted for purposes of quorum. They may participate in debate. They may move motions and vote, and if required, they may submit a notice of motion. To this minute, I still do not know, because I'm looking at Mr. Nader, I'm looking at Mr. Perkins, I'm looking at Mr. Cooper, I'm looking at Mr. Brock, I'm looking at Mr. Stewart, and I'm now looking at Mr. Genius, which does not reflect the decorum of this particular committee.
Point of order on the same point.
So again, I'll refer you to the chapter 20. I would like a ruling on that, and I would like to know whether or not Mr. Genius has actually been, pardon my French, but Monsieur, je sais pas, je vois pas son nom.
Genuine.
On the same point, Chair.
Évidemment,
If he was subbed in at this committee.
First, Mr. Genuine
But
first.
it's
and
on the
then-
same point,
No, but
Chair. Yeah.
all right, I'm going to go to Mr. Nader first.
Just to clarify, the standing orders are clear on this matter. Refer the members to Standing Order 119. Any member of the House who is not a member of a standing special legislative committee may, unless the House or the committee considered otherwise orders, take part in the public proceedings of the committee, but may not move or vote or move any motion, nor be part of any quorum. Any members can participate. It's very clear. Standing Order 119. That's how we govern ourselves. This has been debated in other committees. It's been dealt with. It's in the standing orders, Chair.
Thank you. Is your, on this issue, Mr. Genuine, or?
Yeah.
you guys
So,
want to play ball? We'll play ball.
Yes,
I mean,
Mr. Genuine.
like,
Just one. I do want, Mr. Derail, those are the standing orders that we govern ourselves. It is why occasionally we do have Green Party members that come to this committee and that participate with witnesses.
It is
and
clause
do-
by clause.
and do participate. Mr. Genuine, you have the floor, please.
yeah. Yeah, so just, Chair, like, again, respectfully to members, there are rules that are well established. I think the House of Commons does provide training opportunities for members who are interested in digging further into them. When it comes, so I think Mr. Nader dealt very well with the one maybe misunderstanding that's at the table. The other issue is that when a question of privilege is raised at committee, it is not for the chair to rule that, yes, privilege was broken. It's for the chair to determine whether or not it's a matter touching on privilege. It's for the committee to determine itself through a privilege motion. In the same way that in the House, when a question is raised, the Speaker does not determine whether there's been a violation of privilege. The Speaker determines whether there is a prima facie case that there's been a violation of privilege, at which point there is a privilege motion that's been made. But members seem to be surprised that it is considered a matter of privilege when witnesses don't answer questions. There is a massive amount of jurisprudence verifying this. The Winnipeg Labs document issue began when a witness refused to answer a question. The issues with Mr. Firth were privilege relating to a failure to answer questions. There was an issue with Mindone where a question of privilege was raised regarding his failure to answer a question. The chair ruled that it was touching on a matter of privilege, although the committee voted against proceeding with the motion. So there are mountains of jurisprudence on this, and again, I think, like, I'm not trying to be snarky at all. Like, there's training available. There are documents established, and members can read the books. They can avail themselves of those training opportunities.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, can you refer to the clerk
is this-
with an adult conversation as opposed to kid conversation?
Thank you, Mr. Derail. All right. Yeah, Mr. Derail, your comments reflect more on you than this committee or the chair. So you're welcome to conduct yourself. You have a right to be here. I'm going to continue now the debate. Mr. Brock, you have the floor, please.
And relinquish my time. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper, you have the floor. Mr. Derail, you have the floor, please.
So all of these questions were actually asked at the previous committee 4 or 5 months ago, and actually I can read it into the record, but I won't for your own sake, Mr. Perkins, because it would make you look, whatever. I'm just the quality of answers doesn't pertain to a question of privilege, and that's my issue. They're trying to fish for something, and they have been trying. The pattern of the Conservative Party is not about finding the truth. It's about stalling what is happening in the House, and we can see it. There's already a question of privilege in the House right now. There's another one on the docket. And on this side of the House, unlike Mr. Brock, who is a lawyer and would be disbarred from the Law Society of Ontario if he would speak publicly like this, because he simply doesn't, it questions me, what kind of Crown attorneys do we have in Ontario when this man was able to serve, because he simply does not understand the separation of the Justice, the Executive, and Parliament. Parliament has its duty, the Executive has its duty, and Justice has its duty. If Canadians are watching, the RCMP has all of the powers in the world to obtain the documents, and in fact, the Commissioner of the RCMP has written, the Auditor General has written, well, relevancy is relevancy, Mr. Chair, and I will talk about relevancy. They're questioning someone who has already been a witness in front of another committee, and by God, they didn't question what was happening. The same answers he gave at the previous committee, they weren't questioning his relevancy, or they weren't mentioning a question of privilege. But of course, now they are doing that because they want to go into an election. Mr. Chair, I just have a hard time understanding. I just have a hard time understanding when the other side is saying we want to get to the bottom of this. How can we treat them seriously? Ce qui arrive, c'est qu'ils veulent aller à travers.
They want to ruin someone's reputation, someone who served Canada. They want to ruin the reputation of someone who not only served his department, but who served his department well. And a number of times they indicated that the former minister or the new minister have nothing to do with SDTC. And Mr. Chair, you'll recall from the first time I appeared, I've said, when will we stop investigating investigations of investigations? Because I'm starting to think that either we are incompetent, very incompetent, and there are people who were accountants on this committee. Either we are all incompetent because we've had over 8 meetings or 10 meetings, if I count the other committees who've looked at this. Well, it doesn't make any sense. We need to be consistent on this committee. We've always had a relationship before partisanship gets in, before the Conservatives had some wind in their sails. We always had good collaboration here at this committee. Even though I wasn't here, I was still following closely. I was member of the Government Operations Committee for 6 years, and I paid attention to what happened here because we also, before the Auditor General had the opportunity to study this, we were proposing studies for some issues that we wanted the Auditor General to look into. Once again, the fact that the opposition is questioning because they don't agree with the answers they received from a witness. They are questioning because they didn't hear what they wanted to hear. They express their opinions. They have editorials on Mr. Baines. And I don't know how it worked under the Conservative government, but I'd like to know because some people were appointed by Conservative ministers on boards of directors. So there was some pressure. But that's not how we work on this side. We heard a number of times from many witnesses that there was no pressure from ministers, that it was completely separated. We respect decisions that were made by SDTC, even though there were abuses. We need to stop going on hunts. So the Conservatives want to have these hunts every time. They want a question of privilege to try to stop what's happening in the House. And we understand very, very well here that the Conservative members want to embark on a hunt. And the motion was issued just after my colleague, Ms. Khalid, who put forward a very good motion to see if the committee respects the independence of the Auditor General in doing her work. And right after that, a question of privilege. So I wonder what is happening. I imagine the Conservatives don't respect the independence of the Office of the Auditor General when it doesn't suit them. It obviously doesn't suit them. But don't worry, Mr. Perkins, I'll get back to the relevance because everything is connected. We're going in circles at this committee, and we have for months. Mr. Perkins, Mr. Nader, Mr. Brock, Mr. Cooper, and even Garnett, who is asking questions. Nothing that they've asked over the last 3 months has given great revelations. Questions are being asked about which witness spoke to which witness, questioning some witnesses who are here under oath, telling the truth. And now, because Mr. Baines was a Liberal minister, they're saying, oh, he's crooked too. Mr. Chair, we need to have some respect at this committee if we really want to know what happened. I think we need to respect all the reports that were made, all of the testimony at this committee, and I would ask the official opposition to please ask questions that make sense because you're not impressing me at all right now. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Khalid, you have the floor, please.
Much, Chair. And just to start, if it's okay with you, would like some clarification from the clerk as to what time she received the motion of privilege put forward by Mr. Perkins. And then I have comments to add to that. To that, Chair.
Well,
because she's
I
the one
don't.
who
Yeah,
would have
you can
received
certainly
the email.
respond to that, Clerk. I have no idea. It didn't impact the decision I made. But if you want to read out the timesheet of the email you received from, I believe, Mr. Perkins or his office.
All that matters is when I tabled it.
I know.
So I received it at 5:15 p.m. today.
So that really speaks to exactly what I'm wanting to talk about, Chair. We're talking about a motion of privilege where Mr. Perkins felt like his questions were not answered. They sent the motion in while Mr. Cooper was asking questions. This was premeditated by metadata, and I timestamps are there, and I'm sure that if anybody wanted to look, please don't interrupt me. If anybody wanted to look into when this motion was created, according to the metadata, 5:12 p.m., and when last edited at 5:14. Mr. Cooper was still talking during that time, still had the opportunity to ask the questions of the witness. Now, what this says to me, and what the consistency of the actions of so many Conservatives that are sitting opposite me here today, is that this is not a question of privilege. This is a mockery. This is a mockery of our parliamentary system, trying to use the system to create their partisan games and to push witnesses into character assassinations, to leverage the time that we have in this committee for their own partisan benefits. I wonder how many dollars the Conservatives have raised out of clips today, and how those dollars from Russian Rebel News, thank you, and how those dollars are being collected on the backs of taxpayers. Because let's be reminded, all of us, that this committee functions on the backs of taxpayer dollars. Our parliament functions on the backs of taxpayer dollars. We are here in Public Accounts Committee to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used efficiently and effectively. And the fact that Mr. Perkins would move a motion of privilege before there was any issue of the exact same thing that he's trying to talk about in his bogus motion here, that his privilege was somehow impacted, on the backs of taxpayer dollars, raising conservative fundraising dollars on the backs of taxpayer dollars. Why? Why can we not get to the work that this committee has been assigned to do? Why can we not get to the reports of the Auditor General? Why can we not actually talk about matters that are serious, that actually impact Canadians? I really don't understand, Chair, why we're going down this route. And I see each and every member of the Conservatives right now on their phones, as I'm sure that they're tweeting something or the other to, again, put, oh, that's awesome. How is she doing? She's doing great? That's wonderful.
Mr. Perkins, come on.
I'm so glad that that Mr. Perkins has had a moment to connect with his wife. I'm sure she's a very lovely person, and I wish her all the very best. But I also would like Mr. Perkins to use his time as a member of Parliament in a more judicious manner. I think that putting forward bogus and disingenuous motions like this have a negative impact on what this committee is assigned to do and what it should be doing. Now, I'm just going to read out the words of the motion. Excuse me while I go through my lengthy password here. But the words of the motion, that the committee instruct the clerk and analysts to prepare a report to the House which the chair shall table forthwith, outlining the potential breach of privilege concerning Nafti Baines' refusal to answer questions, certain questions which the committee put to him, and his prevarication. My English is not as good as yours, Mr. Perkins, in answering others. Now, given the fact that this motion was drafted before questions were even answered by the witness today, while the questions were in process, while each member of the committee had time to ask their questions, that this motion was drafted way before then really calls into question the motives of the Conservatives. And I, for one, do not want to sit here and let them play their games, because, quite frankly, Canadians deserve better than that. And what the Conservatives are doing, all 6, 7 of them that are in this committee today, is quite deplorable. I really think that Canadians deserve better than to have their hard-earned dollars used for the purposes of partisan hack games. And I've had enough of this, Chair. I don't think that this is a legitimate privilege motion. This is premeditated, and it is being used to raise fundraising dollars for the Conservatives, to delay important legislative work in the House of Commons, to delay important committee work in this committee, and to agitate. We're not in the business of agitation here, Chair. We're in the business of trying to make sure that Canadians understand how their tax dollars are spent, that Canadians have the ability to review how we can improve the process of Canadian dollars in our government, in our democracy. And for us to be sitting here debating a bogus motion like this for the sole purpose of agitation, of delay, of raising fundraising dollars, that is quite the slap to the face of democracy and our democratic institutions. And I can hear Mr. Perkins snickering right now, and it's very unfortunate because he knows exactly what he's done. He knows exactly what he's doing. And what he's doing is agitating. What he's doing is using Canadian taxpayer dollars to raise their own funds. I'm sure that Mr. Cooper does not have the floor, Chair. I'm sure that the floor is mine currently. But I would encourage all of my colleagues to really think about what you're doing and why. This is not how we govern. This is not how we should be conducting ourselves as parliamentarians. This is a very, very, I have to find my words so that I'm using parliamentary language. This is an attempt to take us away from the work of this committee. And I think that we are above that. I really do. I'm sure Mr. Perkins' wife would appreciate that he do the right thing. I would hope that Mr. Perkins acknowledge that this is not a motion of privilege at all. This is a motion of agitation, trying to use taxpayer dollars for political gain of the Conservative Party, to stop the House from functioning, to stop committees from functioning, to raise money for the Conservative Party using clickbait, Russian rebel news, what have you. It's not right. So I would encourage Mr. Perkins to back off, man. This is not the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. I think we have better things to get to in this committee. I don't think that this motion is in order at all. I think that we have, in my 9 years as a member of Parliament, I have sat on a lot of committees, said the experienced litigator. In my 9 years as a member of Parliament, I have listened to a lot of testimony from witnesses. We do not get to decide what witnesses that we invite to this committee have to say. We can ask them for clarification in writing. We can subpoena them to come to committee and answer questions. But Chair, this is your call, how a committee is functioning and what a witness is able to or not able to say in committee. So this should be just as much of a concern to you as it is to me right now. One, your privilege and your order as chair is questioned, but also, what's the purpose here? Are we now setting a precedent where every single witness that comes to committee across the entirety of our committees is now going to be judged as to whether they have answered a question or not answered a question? And to whose liking is that question going to be answered? I'm sure that Mr. Perkins, even, after his role with being appointed with the BDC, would love to sit there and judge whether a witness has actually answered a question to his liking or not. This reminds me of Trump, to be honest, where, he decides whether something is foreign interference or it's not, or is democratic or not, based on where somebody is on the political spectrum, whether they support them or they don't support them. And this is the exact same thing. And I think that if we pass this motion today, if we even entertain this motion today, we are giving in to the politics of agitation here today. And I do not think that that is the right way for us to approach our democratic institutions and the way that we function here as a committee. So, Chair, I will park my comments there, but I would like to get back onto the bottom of your list. I'm just letting you know, bottom of the list. Thank you, Chair.
And you have been added to the list. Next is Ms. Bradford. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I must say I'm a little bit alarmed that you based your ruling that this was actually a privilege most based on Mr. Firth. There's no way that Mr. Baines could be possibly put in the same category as Mr. Firth, who, as we all know, is in a class all by himself. I was here at this meeting, and I found Mr. Baines to be a very credible, respectful witness. In all of our committees, we ask questions. Usually when we ask the question, we don't already know the answer. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And so we have to accept the witness's answers as given, even if we don't like the answer. Now, what I observed before, while the opposition was questioning this witness, as is often the case, the witness wasn't even given a chance to respond. They were constantly interrupted. He would try to say something and he would be interrupted constantly. There is a certain level of rudeness with that. We invite people here to testify, and we should give them a chance to answer the questions. And unfortunately, I find that wasn't the case today, and now the opposition is complaining that he didn't answer the questions. Well, he needed some airtime in order to do that without being constantly interrupted. And this goes on and on and on. And it's a very bad reflection on this place and the people that serve here. One of the things that I would like to point out, so I got elected in 2021, and I was appointed to this committee by the whip. And I remember the whip telling me, you are going to love serving on the Public Accounts Committee because you're going to learn so much about the operations of government. Because you review the Auditor General's reports. The Auditor General examines many different things. She decides what she wants to look at and reports back with inadequacies. And there's learning to be had from that. I wish that's what this committee was doing. I would say for the last 8 months, we haven't had the opportunity to review reports. We haven't been tabling reports from this committee in the House because we're no longer reviewing the Auditor General's reports. Instead, this committee, like most parliamentary committees, is being held up with motions, whether they're privileged or not, brought forward by the opposition, always the same motions on 4 different committees, looking for a smoking gun on some kind of a witch hunt. The prize would be to tar a cabinet minister with some wrongdoing. And there's nothing to see, but it ties up very expensive resources. I want Canadians to know that these committees cost thousands of dollars every time we meet. So if we're talking about wasting taxpayers' dollars and being judicious about taxpayers' dollars being spent fraudulently or not in a good way, what's happening at our committees when every committee is dealing with the same motions? This committee probably had 25 meetings on ArriveCan. Do Canadians care about ArriveCan anymore? 25 meetings. Probably each meeting costs $10,000 or $15,000 when you think of the analysts and the clerks and the interpreters and the catering and all the resources for nothing. So now we're going down the same rabbit hole, this time with Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Same thing. Multiple committees looking at this. For what? The problem has already been resolved. We know there was a problem, but when it was brought to light by the Auditor General's report, immediately the current minister decided to transition it over to the NRC and appointed a temporary brand new board of 3, and it'll be transitioned by the end of this year to the NRC. The funding will resume. It's under control. So really, when the problems are taken care of, I don't know why we persist in continuing to find fault that no longer exists. It has been dealt with. So I find this a very, very frustrating process. And there is a letter that I would like to read into the record from our Auditor General, because again, I remind everyone, this is the Public Accounts Committee. We are supposed to be reviewing the Auditor General's reports and looking at her work. And we shouldn't be doing anything that impedes her work. However, I want to read into the record, because I think it's an important document. It's a letter to our chair, Mr. John Williamson, dated June the 10th of this year. Dear Mr. Williamson, I'm writing further to the motion in the House of Commons seeking the production of documents regarding Sustainable Development Technology Canada. I understand that it would be considered by the House of Commons this afternoon. I wanted to ensure that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is aware of some of the short-term and long-term impacts of this motion. In my view, the requirement to produce my entire audit file to the law clerk and parliamentary counsel compromises my independence and is also likely to discourage departments, agencies, and Crown corporations from providing me free and timely access to the information required for my audits going forward. The objective of this motion appears to be about ensuring that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, has access to the information in my audit file. In cases where the RCMP has engaged with my office, we have always cooperated in a timely manner. Doing so has always involved direct communication with the RCMP investigators and a timely response by my office to production orders from the RCMP. It is unclear to me why the law clerk and parliamentary counsel should be part of this established process with the RCMP. I believe that it is also important to inform the committee that there will be considerable expense to my office to produce our entire audit file to the law clerk and parliamentary counsel. Our understanding is that the translation of all documents would be required. The budget for my office's resources does not include such expenses. We would need to divert financial resources that would otherwise be used to produce audits for Parliament. Yours sincerely, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada. Clearly, the point our Auditor General is making, this request or demand is compromising her work and her future work. It would cause great disruption to her department, take them off the work they would normally be doing, great expense she doesn't have a budget for. All for what? To do something that shouldn't be requested in the first place, because it not only compromises her, it would also compromise the independence of the RCMP. So I do have really, really grave concerns about this privilege motion, about why we have to debate it. I don't think just because some of the MPs didn't like the answers that Mr. Baines, our witness tonight, was giving when he had an opportunity to speak, and that was very limited. I don't think that means that somebody's privilege has been abused. You know, we called him here. He was quite prepared to answer it. And yes, maybe sometimes he did use the phrase, "I don't recall." We often hear that. You have to consider the man left the position as the minister in January of 2021. That'll soon be 5 years ago. How many of us can remember every conversation and meeting that we had 4.5 or 5 years ago? I know I don't. Maybe some of you do. I don't think it's reasonable to expect anyone to. And I think if they say, "I don't recall," that's very likely an honest answer. So those are the points that I wanted to speak to this. And thank you for giving me time.
You are welcome, Ms. Bradford. Suivant. Prochaine, c'est...
Next, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One issue that is important to me is that a member of the government now is not accepting the premise that answers from the witness were totally unsatisfactory, and I'll get back to that, but feels entitled to criticize the quality of the questions. I don't think he's understood how a committee operates. The questions are asked by the person asking them. The answers need to be based on those questions and answered in good faith. I have a good example of a question that was not asked at industry regarding my first questions on his meetings with Amber Batul when she was chief of staff at SDTC. He started by telling me that he had met her maybe once or twice, and then he continued and told me that he met her a few times. And then when I asked him how many times he met with Ms. Batul when he was minister and she was chief of staff at SDTC, he said he doesn't know if it was once or twice or 10 or 15 times. That is strictly impossible. That means that the person is answering in bad faith, because anybody here could give a ballpark number for the number of times somebody was met with over a period of time. I can tell you how many times in the ballpark. Otherwise, it's bad faith. And that, Mr. Chair, is unacceptable. Mr. Baines answered no question asked calmly and respectfully by this committee. And it's deplorable because we need to do important work. The Auditor General raised a number of very problematic issues, and he was the minister responsible for SDTC. When all of the facts described in the Auditor General's report were committed. So he's supposed to be able to answer questions, and he did not do so. He had a number of opportunities to do so today, and he did not do so. And in addition, there's the example I just gave showing bad faith, showing a simple refusal to answer questions from parliamentarians, which to me is a breach of parliamentary privilege. So I won't take longer on that, and I hope we will be able to proceed as quickly as possible to a vote to determine if this was really a motion of privilege. But please know that I do think there is a breach of parliamentary privilege here. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Next.
Mr. Erskine-Smith, please, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. So a couple things on this, but it is, I think, virtually impossible, given where we are at right now in this process, that if we were to report back to the House on this question, that the Speaker would find a prima facie case of that their privilege has been breached here. Like we have a situation where a witness said they didn't recall in a couple of cases, where the witness was repeatedly cut off in the midst of answering a question. And I take the point of Natalie that she didn't feel her questions were directly answered in a way that she was looking for. The witness is still in the midst of, from what I heard from the chair, very clearly at the outset, and then again when he excused Mr. Baines, that there was an understanding that he could come back and he was willing to come back. And so I've said this previously that it was premature, but it very obviously, if we were to report it at this time, it would not be a prima facie breach of privilege. I mean, not only does it not amount to anywhere close to the Firth precedent, which was a deeply concerning precedent, this is no different from any number of instances of testimony I've heard over the years where we don't get the yes or no answer that we demand from a witness, perhaps, but there's still an answer whether we like it or not. And I should just note, because there have been many aspersions of criminal conduct on Ms. Verschuren by Conservatives, we should know in the midst of answering a question about Ms. Verschuren and the point that she was appointed by the Harper government initially on a board, we should, it would be worth understanding, and I don't know if Conservatives fully understand her history, and we know that the Ethics Commissioner has found a couple of violations. For example, she should have recused herself instead of abstaining. In a second instance, she voted for a bundled approval in keeping with legal advice, and ultimately that was incorrect advice to follow. But this isn't a criminal character and criminal conduct here, despite what Conservatives allege. And if we had allowed Mr. Baines to finish his answer, we would have learned, for example, that she began her career as a development officer with the Cape Breton Development Corporation. She then worked with the Canada Development Investment Corporation. She then worked at Amasco. She launched Michaels of Canada. For those who know, I've got kids who enjoy arts and crafts. And then she landed the CEO role at Home Depot, where she grew that company, Home Depot Canada, in a significant way. She has been appointed to a number of government advisory roles, including the Economic Advisory Council during the economic crisis in 2008, the Canada-US Council for the Advancement of Women Entrepreneurs and Business Leaders, the Advisory Council for NAFTA. She recently participated in government roundtables on climate action decarbonization. She is the chair of the Mars Discovery District Board. She's on the board of the Ontario Energy Association. In 2011, in the Harper tenure, she was honored as an Officer of the Order of Canada for her contributions. She was appointed in 2010 as the co-chair of the
Point of
Governor
order,
General's
Chair.
Leadership Conference. Sorry.
Just one,
Yes, sure. What's the point of order?
Yes,
sure.
I do have to, and yes, Mr.
Yeah, this is not relevant to the question of privilege regarding Mr. Baines's non-response.
Well, it is. Yes, it is, because he was cut off. Mr. Baines was cut off in answer to a specific question. Mr. Baines was cut off in answer to a specific question by Mr. Perkins about Ms. Verschuren when he was starting to articulate her long-standing record of public service and contribution, including the fact she was appointed by not only Harper, but by Flaherty. And so, yes, her record, that answer is relevant because he was cut off in the course of answering it. And to be of assistance, I mean, and I'm almost done, Garnett, I'm almost done. In 2010, she was appointed co-chair of the 2012 Governor General's Leadership Conference, Canada's premier leadership training event, and she was honored by the Canadian Business Hall of Fame in 2019. So cast criminal aspersions as you like, but definitely do it with parliamentary privilege at your back, because it's defamatory outside of the House of Commons, because there is no criminal conduct here on behalf of Ms. Verschuren, and a long-standing record of contribution to Canada. And keep in mind here that, yes, I'll be the first to criticize the conduct of STDC in relation to its conflicts mess. I'll be the first to criticize the fact that they were following incredibly bad legal advice. I'll be the first to criticize ethics violations where, yes, of course, a recusal should have been necessary instead of an abstention. Of course, they should not have bundled approval where they were considering past conflicts as sufficient, and they should have declared continued conflicts. Of course, that is the case. And that is why major action has been taken to clean up that mess. But to suggest criminal conduct and then to cut off former Minister Baines when he's in the midst of answering a question about her character, and then to further claim that your privilege has been violated because questions weren't answered, answers that you had previously cut off. I mean, it is laughable. And we can invite Mr. Baines back, because my understanding was his testimony wasn't over. So I'll be voting against a privilege motion because this sets a terrible precedent. If this is a violation of privilege, any witness that comes and doesn't give us an answer we like ends up being a violation of privilege. And a violation of privilege is something we should take very, very seriously. And we should not lower the standard in a laughable partisan way. And the second thing I will say is, I will guarantee you, if we report this back to the House, it will be dismissed by the Speaker, because it is impossible to think that on such a low standard that would apply to so many witnesses that we've seen come to this committee and many other committees, where we get an answer we don't like. Do not recall. You might not like that answer, but that's an answer, Mr. Perkins, and you might not like it, but it's certainly not going to be found to be a prima facie violation and breach of privilege.
Thank you. Suivant, c'est Mr. Drouin, s'il vous plaît.
Next, Mr. Drouin. Mr. Chair. Thank you once again. I'm looking closely at what's happening with this question of privilege, or the motion that was presented by my dear colleague, Mr. Perkins. At the same time, if I look at what happened on the other side, all of the parties on the other side of the House, there are a number of members who used funds to go to conventions and said, yes, I went to caucus, but I used public funds to go to conventions. Whether it's the Bloc, the NDP, or the Conservatives, they're all the same. We put an end to that practice in 2014. when we talk about transparency, when I hear my colleagues on the other side of the House talk about transparency and ensuring money is spent properly, excuse me, I'll get back to the issue.
And since I'll remind you that your entire caucus visited my riding in St. Andrews just 2 short years ago. So,
Mr. Chair, that's
but
quite
I would ask you
inappropriate.
to stick to the relevance,
Here in
please.
Ottawa, how is the
Et vous avez,
And you are entirely correct. We visited your riding, but it was a caucus, not a political convention, and that's the difference. And you haven't understood it well. You want to take power, you want to govern, but you don't even understand the rules of the House, Mr. Chair. I have a problem with that. And the other side, it's the same, Mr. Drain. It's not for you to talk about relevancy.
That is my job, to keep members on relevance to the motion.
justement, vous êtes sur une...
You are on a pedestal. You're talking about having transparency. It's important for witnesses to appear before our committee. It's important to advocate for doing things properly, for spending money properly, taxpayer money. And you are in opposition, and you're not even able to spend public money where we have rules in the House. And here you are accusing us. Of course, at SDTC, there are people who made mistakes. But from there to... Listen, Mr. Baines came here. I wouldn't even be surprised if Mr. Baines came here and we asked the question, who consulted you, Mr. Baines, about coming before our committee? Was it your aunt? Was it your uncle? Now we'll invite everyone's aunt and uncle here. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense anymore, Mr. Chair. It needs to stop. The Auditor General produced a report. There was a report from Raymond Chabot. They produced an excellent report. There's another report from McCarthy, THROW. There are 3. When will it stop? And the proof is that it's not even related. The proof is that even the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, has false petitions inviting people to sign here. But what I've noticed is that it's not even sign here. It redirects people to a partisan website from the Conservative Party. So there's no relation with what's happening here. And now there's blame. My colleague, Mr. Erskine Smith, is totally correct. If this is deemed to be a question of privilege, then any witness who comes here, those who believe in climate change, for example, and those who don't believe in climate change, I'll mention the Bloc and the NDP. They believe in climate change. The other side isn't so sure. But those who appear here, well, if we question their testimony and say it's a question of privilege, well, it makes no sense. And I'll get back to what Ms. Khalid, Ms. Bradford have said. All of this is in the hope of creating interference and obstruction in Parliament, in the House of Commons. And you already have parliamentary obstruction. You're obstructing on your own motion. It makes no sense. Can we treat this committee, public accounts, with respect? Are we able to focus on issues that are really what Canadians and Quebecers want us to look at? For example, cybercrime. The Auditor General produced a report on that. But because we're doing investigations into investigations into investigations, we're not looking at other issues that are much more important for seniors. The Bloc Québécois advocates for seniors in the House day after day. Are they telling me that the seniors are not important at this committee? Are they saying we shouldn't look at the Auditor General's report on cybercrime, which we know that people who are victims are mainly seniors? No. We'll do other investigations into investigations. We'll say that the witnesses who appear here are no longer credible. It makes no sense, Mr. Chair. And I would invite my colleagues, in all transparency, my colleagues from the Conservative Party to reveal how much they've fundraised on this issue, because I'm sure apparently it's not enough because they want to keep talking about this, but they don't want to talk about other issues that are more important for Canadians and Quebecers. And I think I've already mentioned an example that's important. But I'll come back to Mr. Erskine-Smith's point on the issue of precedent that we are creating. Mr. Erskine-Smith, I'm looking at you on the screen. Your child is there. Great. Yes, we'll all say, "Ah." But the question that's important is if we don't agree with what a witness tells us at committee, will we raise our hands and say it's a question of privilege? I see that the opposition parties are not interested in working to advance important issues for Canadians. Some will take partisan reasons. They want to collect more names. Give me your name, give me your address, give me your phone number. And yes, we'll work on your issue. And what are the other parties doing? Well, they're complicit. Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, and Jagmeet Singh have a coalition. They're all guilty of working together. And I'm sure that Pierre Poilievre is extremely, well, he must be so popular in Quebec. I'm sure the Bloc is proud of defending him. But they're following the Conservative line, and I don't understand why. And the NDP is in the same boat, following the Conservative Party line, and I don't understand why. So I don't know what type of coalition is happening on the other side of the House, but it would seem that there's a new coalition, Pierre Poilievre, the Bloc Québécois, and the NDP. Mr. Perkins can say what he wants, but there was no problem when he was appointed by a Conservative to a board of directors. Inaudible. But Liberals were not appointed. We know, Mr. Perkins, you are best friends. You gave, like the CEO of the board of directors, you're in the same boat. You didn't give $1, $2, $3. You gave $1,600 to a candidate for your leadership. You're guilty. You're in the same boat. And now you're trying to smear us with that, and I don't agree with that. The minister, the new minister, François-Philippe Champagne, has nothing to do with this. Mr. Baines has nothing to do with this, and you know that full well.
Point of order, Mr. Perkins.
9 Liberal directors have been...
Mr. Perkins, Mr. Perkins.
He made a reference. That member made a reference to me.
That does not give you the right
as
of
doing
reply.
the same thing of what Liberal appointees done. Liberal appointees have stolen $400 million.
Mr. Perkins, that does not give you the right of reply on the spot. If you would like to raise your hand, I'll put you down. Mr. Derail, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that people are passionate, even near 7 p.m. Who stole money? Well, if there are people who stole money, well, let's let the RCMP do their job. Let's let the RCMP investigate, do their own investigation. Let's let the RCMP, if there were people who were guilty, put them before a judge and put them in prison. I have no problem with that. My problem is that there's these fishing expeditions with Mr. Baines, with Minister Champagne. They are not looking at this level of detail. They work much higher. That's my problem. The opposition heard loud and clear. There were questions, even this week, to the board of directors about things that didn't happen. Yes, what are you going to do? Well, can we let the board of directors see the report before making a decision? That would be the most rational thing to do. But no, that's not what's being done. There are accusations, reputations are being smeared that have nothing to do with this. To have more names in their database for the Conservative Party, to be able to raise even more funds. And we heard this.
Point of order.
Point of order.
As much as I'm thrilled to be sitting in committee at 6:52, listening to this wonderful tale told by my colleague, he's repeated himself numerous times, Chair, and you know the rules, and he knows the rules with respect to original thought. He's running out the clock, repeating the same talking lines.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Brock. So, Mr. Durant, you do have the floor. I ask you to remain relevant and to come up with new ideas. Over to you, please.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup et je sens.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. It seems that my colleagues don't like the fact that we are highlighting everything that was revealed at committee. Oh, we see reinforcements. Mr. McCauley has arrived to committee. Welcome. We have 2, 4, 6, 7 members of the Conservative Party. It takes a lot of heads from the Conservative Party to fight the Liberals. That's okay. We appreciate that. How's the interpretation, Mr. McCauley?
Oui. Ben, c'est justement le non-sens.
So, what doesn't make sense is how many meetings are we going to have? 8 meetings so far. Indu met a number of times. The same people who were asking questions were there at the other committee, and here they are again. And the same questions were asked as at Indu in June. There's never been a question of privilege on what Mr. Baines has said, and then, whoops, all of a sudden, there's no answer. Maybe he said the truth, maybe he didn't. We don't like this. Quite frankly, Mr. Chair, you're taking me for a fool, and I don't accept that. I don't accept that. I'm referring to myself. Well, I'm referring to myself.
If you insist, you have the floor.
There is. I didn't treat anybody of you. I treated myself. So you know.
Si vous insistez, allez-y.
I didn't insult anybody but me.
But the fact is, we're questioning the whether or not Mr. Baines' testimony was satisfactory to questions that the opposition was asking, and he perhaps didn't know the answers. I mean, I would love to question everybody on testimony, what happened 8 years ago, and that is not a question of privilege. I'm sorry, but that is not a question of privilege. And from time and time again, we have heard from different testimony that ministers or ministers' offices were not involved in the day-to-day operations of SDTC. We have heard from time to time and time again, and they're still not believing that. Alors, je pose la question.
So I'm asking the question, so how much time do we want to spend here to keep playing these games? We're going in circle here. Like as a committee, we're going in circle, and I've been here for 5 committee meetings, and no MPs from the opposition has taught me anything new. I mean, things we didn't know already. So for me, Mr. Chair, when...
It was a quick line. Mr. Durant, you have the floor.
Is I repetition or the opposition repetition? Or you can call me out, Rick. You're giving me a break anyway. So, but more seriously, when we're questioning whether or not a witness who has already appeared and been questioned by the same member at a previous committee in June, whether or not this is a question of privilege, it has absolutely nothing to do with SDTC, but everything to do with what is happening in the House. They don't want to come to work. We know. They want to go into an election right away. They've all told us. So they're not interested in getting to the bottom of this. So any motion of production of papers that they put forth is not serious. I haven't said that word, by the way. But it's not serious because they want to go into an election tomorrow morning. They probably have their campaign office already rented, their campaign signs. Haven't said that, by the way. That's not reputation. Right? So I'm just saying I'm questioning the seriousness of them to actually get to the bottom of this. And it's shameful that we're We're asking a member who've already appeared before committee and testified.
Now,
to
Mr.
come
Duran,
back.
you are, this is now getting.
Well, I put a new adjective to it, Mr.
Yeah, but
Chair.
that's, you are getting repetitive, so.
I will conclude on that. Monsieur le Président,
Sure. Mr. Chair, I'm going to conclude on this. I was really expecting that the Conservative Party would play those political games. What I wasn't expecting is that the party of Jack Mitzing or the Bloc Québécois would align with the Conservatives. And I'm sure that in Quebec, people who are, aligning themselves with Pierre Poilievre, they have no respect because Pierre Poilievre does not reflect the value of francophones, whether they are in Quebec or anywhere else in Canada.
Pierre Poilievre has no interest in what has happened in CDBC, and what interests him is that funds are collected, more petitions are collected to have more names in their database. On that note, Chair, I am going to conclude my remarks. Thank you. Thank you. You were really under the line here.
Have a 5-minute health recess, and we'll come back, and Ms. Khalid will have the floor. So just a 5-minute recess for everyone. Meeting is suspended.